If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 10. We'll be there in just a second. There we go. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, on this past Friday night, we went up to see that Christmas with the Chosen, and again, I thought it was fantastic, absolutely amazing, encouraging, inspiring. I mean, the episode was great, as their episodes usually are, but I was particularly inspired by the music and the monologues that were a part of the showing. There were some fantastic renditions of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Joy to the World. My personal favorite happened to be one that was How Great Thou Art. It was fantastic. And there were many others beyond that. And I left the theater feeling so filled with thanks, like my cup had been filled with the hope of what Christmas really means. And as I was leaving, smiling, just giving thanks, I passed two employees who, they were coming in to clean up after the crowd following the showing. And again, I was still so overwhelmed with thankfulness. I'm grateful for these guys who are coming to pick up my popcorn that I left on the ground. So I just said, "Hey, thanks, guys." One replied, "Sure thing." And then he looked at me and he said with what I thought to be a bit of a smirk, "Have a happy holiday." Happy holiday? Surely if he had witnessed what I had just witnessed, wouldn't he have been saying, "Merry Christmas? Happy holiday." So I looked him square in the eyes and I said, "Thanks." And I went about my way. Not the response you were expecting that I would have necessarily responded to in that moment. I mean, maybe I could have scoffed and told him, Jesus is the reason for the season, brother. Or maybe I should have, with a smidge of smugness said, "Yes, and Merry Christmas to you too." Today we're going to start a series. It's a Christmas series. I do one every year. This one happens to be called Christmas Mission, Keep Christ in Christmas. That tagline is probably one that you're familiar with, I'm guessing. In fact, you've probably seen it on Christmas cards, bumper stickers, or signs declaring that truth. And it is my prayer that our church wouldn't lose the focus of Christ at Christmas time. But what does it mean to keep Christ in Christmas? I mean, is it about waging a war against this happy holiday crowd who would seek to remove Christ from every aspect of this year? Or maybe we should spend our energies fighting the government agencies who would allow manger scenes to be taken off of public property. I mean, how will people know the beauty of Christmas if they can't see a manger scene amongst all the Santa decorations in town? How can we make sure that we keep Christ in Christmas so that others might know the beauty of what Christmas really means? I'd like to offer this for your consideration this morning. Maybe it's not about decorations or the greetings that people use. I mean, I think God isn't up in heaven lamenting the removal of nativity scenes or the greetings of happy holidays like many people are down here. I have this thought that I think he kind of expects non-Christians to act like they're non-Christians, right? I don't think he gets as bent out of shape at that as we do. But I think what he does care about is how his people act and respond, what they do and what they don't do. You see, we keep Christ in Christmas by acting like Christ at Christmas. So in this series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at some passages, and many of them aren't even part of the traditional Christmas story that you would expect me to cover. We'll look at them, we're going to look at Jesus, and I'll bring in some characters that are part of the Christmas story that I feel exemplify the things we're talking about each week. But that being said, let's go ahead and dive into our passage this morning. We're going to begin at verse 42. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." First thing I want to point out from this passage, Jesus came to serve humbly. It might benefit you to have a little bit background to that passage. Typically, I do that before I read it, but this time I chose to do it after. You see, in chapter 10, in verses around 36 or so, Jesus gathers his disciples together and he tells them something. He says, "Listen, guys, I'm going up to Jerusalem. And when I get there, I'm going to be arrested and I'm going to be sentenced to death by the rulers and religious leaders, and they're going to hand me over to the Gentiles." So in response to this, the very next passage that we see is John and James, two of his disciples, going up to him and making a really strange request, especially in light of what he just said. Jesus says, "I'm about to die," and the next thing we see James and John doing is saying, "Jesus, we want to sit at the right and left of your kingdom. Put us in places of position and power and authority over everyone else." Perhaps they were motivated by the fact that what happens if Jesus does disappear? I mean, we certainly don't want Peter or somebody else running the show, right? So maybe we gotta get in here and make sure our positions are secure. And they make this, maybe that's the reason, maybe it wasn't. But they make this request, and the 10 find out about it, and they get really upset about it. Indignant towards those two disciples. And you can almost imagine the quarreling that's about to take place. The fracturing, the division, as these disciples are again fighting for position and who's the greatest among them and all that. In response to this, Jesus pulls them all together. And he says what he does in verses 42 through 45. He points to to examples in their culture that they would have definitely related to and also been really annoyed by. You know those Gentile rulers, right? They take advantage of their authority. They abuse it to control people. They flex on others, so to speak, to make sure that everyone knows who they are and what type of power they have. They serve their own interests, not the interests of others. He says, "Not so among you." I mean, let's think about for a minute the example that Jesus left for us. He was the one who had all authority in heaven and on earth. I mean, if anybody could flex, Jesus could flex and clear the room, make sure everybody was down on a knee. But he didn't do that. He could have came in a palace. He could have decided that he was going to come and seek out a position of power and authority that made his job easy, right? I'm just going to issue these commands from my throne, and everybody's going to be forced to follow them, and that's how I'm going to build my kingdom. He could have done that. And yet he chose to step into this world, being born of a lowly maiden in a manger, deciding that in order to build his kingdom, he was going to take the knee and serve everybody else. That's amazing. And what he's saying is, that's how I'm calling you to serve. That's how I'm asking you to follow my example. To serve with humility. You know, that reminds me of another character in the Christmas story, Joseph. I am in awe when I consider Joseph. I really am. In fact, as I was watching the Christmas Chosen episode, I was drawn to the character of Joseph yet again. Here is a guy who is just doing what people do in their culture, seeking out a wife, and he thinks he's found one of high value, who was honorable, who trusted and honored God. And he finds out this news. The perception is that she betrayed him. Somehow she has become pregnant. He doesn't know how. And what does Joseph decide to do in Matthew 1:18 and 19? It's remarkable. I mean, he could have publicly humiliated Mary, even to the point where people in that day would have stoned her for her perceived actions. Or at the very least, he could have, maybe he didn't want to go so far as to kill her, but he could have sent her home and let everybody know how shameful she was. So she would have this label that followed her the rest of her life. He could have done so many things out of vengeance or to satisfy his own pride. But he didn't. He acted humbly. He decided, okay, well, I'll just divorce her quietly and not open her up to public shame. In that moment, he chose to set aside his own needs for the sake of somebody else. He didn't seek to act out on what he thought he deserved or what he wanted. What's remarkable is he was modeling the very same characteristics of the one that was going to come to save all mankind. Jesus came to serve humbly. Joseph showed us an example of what that looks like. From this passage, we also see this truth. Jesus came to serve sacrificially. He looks at his disciples and he says, I didn't come to be served, guys, but to serve and to give my life a ransom for many. A ransom, something that would be used to do something for somebody else so that they could be set free from the things that enslave them. I'm going to serve at cost. I'm going to serve when it's not comfortable. I mean, Jesus could have been content with doing miracles and teaching the crowds and a lot of the things that he did that impacted lives in that setting. But he wasn't content to serve just when it was comfortable, just when it was easy for him. He gave his life. It reminds me again of Joseph. And it reminds me of Mary as well. So Joseph, when the angel said, I want you to take Mary as your wife and explain to him why he should feel comfortable doing that, the child was the result of the work of the Holy Spirit coming upon her and all that stuff. By taking Mary as his wife, Joseph was sacrificing his reputation among everybody else. How could a righteous person enter in? I mean, he stepped out of the way that it was meant to be in their perspective. And everybody would look at him differently in that town from that day forward. But for Joseph, even his reputation was worth giving up if it meant doing what God had called him to do. And then even as you go, the story goes further. You go on into chapter 2 of Matthew, and the baby's been born, and at some point, the wise men come, and that leads Herod to do what he does, an atrocious thing by killing all those 2 years and younger in Bethlehem. And then God appears to Joseph in the middle of the night. It says, I want you to go to Egypt. And in that moment, Joseph has to decide, well, okay, my plans have already been kind of shipwrecked, right? At least from my perspective. Wanted to marry Mary, and now that we're starting off our marriage, and she's got a child, and it's not mine, it's supposed to be God's, and now he's asking me to go to Egypt. I wanted to go back and start moving forward in my life. He could have been thinking about all of those things. God was asking him to sacrifice his future plans for his future purposes. And Joseph is found obedient. Again, this is a remarkable example of a man who knew how to serve others. And then you think about Mary. She had to give up her reputation, her plans, the things that she had hoped would take place within the context of being married. I mean, I'm sure she was filled with all of those plans and expectations. And then all of a sudden this angel appears to her and says, I want you to know that you have been favored by God. He has chosen you to carry his son. And again, she knew what that meant. How is she going to explain to her parents that she's pregnant? How is she going to explain it to Joseph? How will she explain it to everybody else in town. I mean, they are going to make huge assumptions, and nobody's going to believe her. And how does she respond? Again, absolutely remarkable. I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. She was willing to sacrifice. They were willing to lay something down, just like Jesus was willing to lay something down so that others could have life, so that others could be served, so that others could have hope. We're meant to do that too. Last thing I'm going to point out from the passage itself is that Jesus came to serve intentionally. See, we can talk about humility and we can talk about sacrificially, but those things don't just happen naturally for us at times. Very often, unless I am intentional, I can become very prideful. I don't mean to. There's just something that can bubble up if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not intentional in the things that I am doing. It's very easy for me to serve myself because I know how it feels to feel a lack or to feel a need or to feel a want, right? I mean, I am more aware of my emotions than I am the emotions of others at times. And if I'm not intentional, I can put myself above other people. Jesus didn't do that. He told his disciples in our passage that if you want to be great, you got to be a servant. And if you really, really, really want to be great, you got to become the slave of all. You got to intentionally take a posture in life that allows you to serve others. And there are a ton of examples in the Gospels of how Jesus did this. One day in Luke 19, he goes up to a guy, Zacchaeus, who's sitting in a tree. He goes out of his way to the sycamore tree and says, Zacchaeus, I'm going out of my way to stay at your house because I need to spend time with you today. Zacchaeus' life has changed forever. Jesus went out of his way at the Last Supper, took the posture of a servant, and washed his disciples' feet, intentionally teaching them something in the process. Now, in so many ways, in those instances and others, Jesus could have just put his head down, right? He could have just plowed forward and wished that everyone else's problems would go away. Didn't they understand he was just about to be crucified? I couldn't have imagined knowing what that was going to be like, knowing it was going to happen, and having all these needs around him. He could have just said, you know what, if I don't pay attention, eventually they'll just go away and I can move forward with what God's called me to do. But Jesus didn't do that. He intentionally took the posture of a servant, and he paid attention to opportunities to meet needs. And again, wouldn't you know it, there's another character in the Christmas story who exemplified that. Joseph. He's told to take Mary as his wife, and he doesn't just sit around and mull that decision over, like, okay, I might get around to that, like, the day before we leave for Bethlehem, so I don't have to face all the conversations that could happen as a result. It says he went to her and he took her in to be his wife. Immediate response. I'm blown away. Like maybe there was an internal debate. I guess I don't know, but I know whatever the debate was, it led him to immediate obedience. Intentionally, he said, okay, I'm going to follow through on what the Lord has called me to do. You see, whether it's this posture of being ready to respond to the opportunities that God has for us, or whether it's intentionally looking around for opportunities to begin with, we're called to serve intentionally, just like Jesus did. See, the servant of Christ understands that when we serve with humility, when we serve sacrificially, when we serve intentionally, we help accomplish God's purposes. And here's the key. We keep Christ and Christmas as we do it. More than a greeting, more than decorations, more than letting everyone know that we're Christians by a sweater or something else that we do during Christmas time. We keep Christ and Christmas by serving. So how can we do that? that's what we're called to do, if that's Jesus' model for us, what are some things that we need to consider? First off, we've got to keep the right focus as you serve. You see, we serve, again, for the benefit of others and for the glory of God. I don't serve for my own benefit and my own satisfaction. There is oftentimes a natural result of serving in a way that honors God, and that there's joy that is accompanied by it. But I don't serve to get the joy. I serve to make sure that others receive joy, receive love. And I know sometimes in the midst of our busyness and the things that are going on, it can be tempting to say, you know what? I just don't got time to serve. I've got other things I've got to do. Or again, maybe on the flip side, maybe we're like, okay, I am going to serve, but I'm really looking forward on what I can receive from them in return. Maybe I'm serving them just so I can have that good feeling because I haven't had a good feeling. Maybe I'm serving them just so that they'll be prompted to serve me and do something that I would like to have done for me. You see, it's important for us, if we're going to keep Christ in Christmas, that the spotlight doesn't remain on us, but that the spotlight remains on Him. That people are left thinking at the tail end of our service, not how great we are, but how good and great God is. I said that a couple weeks ago. It's so important. Anything that we do shouldn't magnify us, but should be used to magnify God. That's His desire, and so we keep the right focus as we serve. There's this passage in Romans chapter 15 that says this: "We who are strong ought to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up. For even Christ did not please Himself." It's not why He came. He came to serve. And so let us do more than just serving ourselves this Christmas season. Let us have a greater impact. Let us keep Christ in Christmas by serving others, by focusing on the little ways that we can make a difference. There's something in that passage, though, I need to point out. Because it is possible for those who have especially large hearts to feel like, I got to keep giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. I can't meet all the needs, right? There's that potential that exists. And so I want to encourage us with this truth, lest we become overburdened by the thought that we have to, always be focusing on someone else and not taking care of ourselves. In that passage, it says, we who are strong ought to bear. If we're going to be able to keep the focus on other people appropriately, we got to make sure that God is also strengthening and serving our hearts, right? Because a heart that needs healing is not going to be able to focus appropriately on the needs of others. Either we will end up using it as something to feed our own ego, or we'll get frustrated and give up, but we won't be able to keep the focus like Christ kept the focus if our hearts aren't right. It's been a while since I said it, so I might as well throw it out there now. The heart of our problems is the problem of our hearts. And if we have a trouble serving in a way that pleases God and helps keep Christ in Christmas, it probably is a result of something not right in our own hearts. But as we come to God, as we receive grace from Him, from our time with Him, from His Word, we can give grace to other people. And the focus can be maintained in a way that honors Him. Second thing I'll say, we got to serve others in a way that costs us something. So I'm reminded of this story I came across years ago. I think I might have even been in high school when I first read it. It's about a pig and a chicken, and they were walking down Main Street having a conversation because that's natural for pigs and chickens to do. I didn't know if you were aware of that. As they're walking, they came across this sign in a restaurant, and the chicken said, "Man, that is a good deal." He says, "Hey, pig, look at that sign in the window. Ham and eggs, all you can eat." That sounds amazing, doesn't it? The pig paused for a moment before he responded to the chicken because he wanted to carefully choose his words. A good deal, you say? Well, for animals like you, it's simply an offering. But for animals like me, it's a sacrifice. And see, it can be very easy to give as long as we can stay in our comfort zone. Like, I'll serve other people just as long as it really doesn't cost me a whole lot. Just as long as I don't have to give up something that I want to hold on to. I mean, think about it. We can go into stores and spend hundreds of dollars. And what's remarkable, the hundreds of dollars that we're spending is going to lead to credit card debt and extra weight that we're going to try to get rid of come January, right? And we can spend all that money and then struggle leaving the store and giving more than a few bucks at a Salvation Army station or a potential other need that comes across our way. We'll give, hey, we'll toss a couple bucks in there as long as it doesn't really cost us a whole lot. As long as we can stay comfortable. As long as it doesn't require sacrifice. And if we are at that point where we're wrestling with whether we should give in a way that costs us, isn't there something inside of us that we have to end up wrestling with? Something that's going to try to convince us, well, if you give sacrificially, you're not going to be able to do this, and I know you really want to do this. Or maybe the enemy starts saying, what do you think you're going to do? What impact is it really going to make anyways? How could God use your little to impact a lot? I'd say go into the Bible and look at a little boy who gave a lunch to Jesus one day. That might remind us of what God can do in feeding multitudes. We get all these voices that can just say, you know what, it's really not worth it. And again, there's that temptation in the midst of this for people to go overboard, to think, well, I just can't meet every need that I exist, especially the people who have big hearts. We're not built to meet every need, but let me ask you something. Could you meet a need that exists around you, even if it requires you to sacrifice just a little bit more? That's really the question. That's how we keep Christ in Christmas, because that's what he did. He didn't meet every single need that existed around him all the time. There were some needs that did go unmet, some healings that never happened, some situations that were never fixed. But he focused on the one that was in front of him, the one that he knew the Father was asking him to meet in that moment. And lives were changed. And if we're willing, we can be a part of changing lives. And so to keep Christ in Christmas, what are we willing to give up so that somebody else might gain? That's the question God's people need to be asking themselves this morning. What are we willing to give up so that someone else might gain? Is the thing that we're not willing to give up really worth holding on to? There's a passage in Hebrews 13:16 that says, "Do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased." Did you notice that? Do good, share with others, and it's going to be a sacrifice. You're going to have to give up something, right? Because an offering that doesn't cost us much isn't really an offering. Isn't really the example that Jesus left for us. We need to do good when sacrifice is required, because that's exactly what Jesus did. There's this awesome passage in Philippians 2 that reminds us of that. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. He was willing to give of himself. He left that example that we might follow, and we keep Christ in Christmas as we follow it. Last thing I'll say. Don't expect opportunities to always come to you. You see, we can be willing to serve as long as God makes it convenient. Don't require sacrifice. And in fact, maybe I'm even willing to sacrifice, but you're going to basically have to gift wrap it, put it on my doorstep, and give me some instructions on exactly what you want me to do, and then maybe I'll do it for you. God's people don't just wait for opportunities to come to them. They look for opportunities to serve. They keep their eyes and their ears open. They search. You want to keep Christ in Christmas? Instead of fighting about whether a manger scene is in public, go put Christ out in the public by looking for opportunities to say, you matter. I see you. I can feel your pain. I want to come alongside you and offer hope. That's how we keep Christ in Christmas. That's how we serve others. And again, sometimes we just wish God would give us step-and-step instructions. Okay, not only do we want him to tell us exactly what we're supposed to do in each situation, but we'd like an estimation of how long that project's going to last. I want you to serve this person. So let's put it, for instance, we would love for God to say, okay, on day one, I want you to go up and just smile and shake that person's hand and just say, hey, how you doing today? And then just listen to them. And then the next day, what I want you to do is go up to them, and I want you to do this specific task. If you do this, it's going to open up an opportunity for you to have another conversation that can draw them a little bit closer to me. And then on the third day, I want you to present the gospel, and this is how they're going to respond. And so in 3 days, we could really wrap this project up, and we can move on to the next thing. Isn't that how we want it? I mean, I have no problem serving if I'm a simple guy. I need some really basic instructions sometimes. God doesn't do that for us, though. He says, love me with everything you got. Love other people. In this moment, love that person. I'm not going to give you the next step right now. I just want you to love that person. I want you to show them that they matter. I want you to serve. I want you to pay attention. Because if you're paying attention, most likely you're going to recognize and respond when I do bring the opportunities along your way. And if you're paying attention, and if you're responding like Jesus did, like Joseph did, you'll keep Christ in Christmas. See, Jesus desires this morning for his people to help keep him in Christmas. But maybe in order for us to do that, we've got to let him serve us first. If we're going to serve, maybe this morning we need to allow Jesus to do what Jesus does best. Serve his people. Love his people. There's this John H. Rice quote that I ran across that says this: you can never truly enjoy Christmas until you can look up into the Father's face and tell him you have received his Christmas gift. So maybe for some today, you need to receive his gift of salvation. He was born as a man for all people, so that all might be saved. Maybe today you need to receive his forgiveness. He died on a cross so that you could be forgiven of any sin, so that you could be set free from whatever your past might have been. In this room, there are stories of people with a past. But that story didn't end with a period or an exclamation point, but with a comma, as God stepped in and transformed it. He can do it for all of us. Maybe for you today, you need to receive his power and strength that comes as a result of his resurrection life living inside of you. He lives today, and Scripture says he makes intercession for you, that you can have power in your time of need, that you can have the strength and the grace needed. Maybe today, before you can serve, you need to receive. But once you've received, go serve. Go keep Christ in Christmas. You see, I believe wholeheartedly, I really do, we have a chance to make Christmas life-transforming this year. And really, it's not just Christmas. As followers, that's an everyday reality. But we have maybe some more opportunities to do that than we normally do, as hearts are turned back towards things of faith during the Christmas time. Let us go take advantage of those opportunities and make a lasting difference. And maybe we can say, well, it's just a small act. But do you know what a small act can do in the hands of a mighty God? Do you know how that can pile up and lead to life transformation? And that over time, Christ is kept in Christmas in a way that he never has before in our lives. Lives are transformed and changed. I'm going to finish up with this story. There's a story of this one church who was performing a Christmas play. And as they were going on, really the highlight of the entire Christmas play is it led to this climactic moment where they dimmed the lights, and then the manger scene where the baby was, it lit up bright as day. And in order to do that, they placed a special bulb in there. And so they were going through the Christmas play, and at the appropriate time, the lights went out, and the audience was just sitting there in reverence. And it was beautiful to behold. Until the bulb burned out in the stable, or in the manger. And suddenly there's this voice heard from one of the shepherds. Hey, who turned off Jesus? Let it not be said this Christmas that God's people turned off Jesus. Let's serve one another, because that's why he came. Let's keep him in Christmas by serving humbly, sacrificially, and intentionally. That's what he did for us. What's God saying to your heart right now? I want you to take a moment to think about that as you process through this sermon. Because no matter how well or not well this sermon came across, what matters is what we do with it. What matters is what you're going to do when you go home or to work, or tomorrow as you're going to some situation. Will this sermon really matter? Will Christ really be kept in Christmas by the way that we serve? So take a moment, reflect on these questions right now.